Attention, brave souls. What you're about to witness might make your heart race. Before the suspense takes over your screen, click subscribe now and hit the like button. Get ready for a spine-chilling experience. But be warned, only the boldest will survive until the end.
My name is Richard Calloway. I'm 63 years old, a retired hunter with over 4 decades of experience under my belt. My life has been shaped by the wilderness, the solitude, the silence, the thrill of tracking game through unforgiving terrains. For years, the mountains were my sanctuary, my escape from a world that felt increasingly loud and meaningless. But after what happened to me in 2003, I gave it all up. I walked away from the hunt and never looked back. This is the story of why. It was late November of 2003, the tail end of the hunting season. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones had already settled over Alaska's Chugach Mountains. I had decided to take one last trip before the snow made the region completely impassable. Solo hunting wasn't unusual for me. I preferred it that way. There was a kind of peace in the isolation, in hearing nothing but the crunch of your boots on snow and the whistle of the wind through the trees. I thought I knew every sound the wild could make. I thought I understood its rhythms, but I was wrong. The drive out to the Chugach Range was uneventful, though the creeping sense of unease started almost as soon as I stepped out of the truck. The wind was sharper than I expected, slicing through my layers like they weren't even there. The trees seemed darker, taller than I remembered, their skeletal branches clawing at the pale sky. I brushed it off. An old man's imagination, I told myself. I'd been doing this for decades. What was there to be afraid of? The first day went as planned. I hiked deep into the range, far from the nearest road, and set up camp near a frozen stream. The silence was perfect, the kind that wraps around you like a blanket. But as the sun dipped below the jagged peaks and the shadows stretched long and thin across the snow, I started to feel watched. You spend enough time in the wild, and you develop a sense for these things. It's not something you can explain. It's a shift in the air, a prickle at the back of your neck. I scanned the tree line, rifle in hand, but saw nothing. Still, the feeling didn't go away. The next morning, I found the tracks. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Each print was nearly twice the size of my own boot, pressed deep into the snow, as though whatever made them was impossibly heavy. They were human, but elongated, with a strange asymmetry that made my stomach twist. I crouched down to get a closer look, running my gloved fingers along the edges. The snow around the tracks was undisturbed. No drag marks, no sign of hesitation. Whatever it was, it had moved with purpose. I followed the trail for hours, deeper into the forest. The prints led me to places no human would dare go, steep inclines, dense thickets, and terrain that even a bear would think twice about crossing. The wind picked up as the day wore on, carrying with it an odd, almost metallic scent that I couldn't place. It wasn't unpleasant, but it set my teeth on edge. By the time I lost the trail, the sun was dipping low again. The wind had settled, leaving the forest deathly quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves. Just the sound of my own breathing, harsh and loud in the stillness. I decided to head back to camp, my nerves frayed but my curiosity burning brighter than my fear. Whatever it was, I told myself it was just an animal. Something rare, maybe even undocumented, but an animal nonetheless. That night, I learned how wrong I was. It started just after midnight, a low, guttural howl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't the mournful cry of a wolf or the sharp bark of a fox. It was something deeper, more resonant. It made my chest vibrate, my stomach churn. I sat bolt upright in my tent, rifle clutched tight in my hands, and strained to listen. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by a heavy, deliberate crunch of snow. Footsteps. My campfire had died hours ago, leaving only the faint glow of embers to light the clearing. I peered out through the flap of my tent, my breath fogging in the freezing air. For a moment, I saw nothing, and then movement, just at the edge of the trees. A shadow impossibly tall, slipping silently between the trunks. I stayed awake until dawn, gripping my rifle so tightly my fingers ached. The howls continued, growing more distant as the hours passed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was, it hadn't left. It was watching me, waiting. When the first light of day broke over the peaks, I packed up my camp and started back toward my truck. I told myself I'd just imagined it, that the isolation was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. The tracks were still there, half buried in the fresh snow. I didn't come to the Chugach Mountains to be scared. I came for one last hunt, one last moment of mastery over a world I thought I understood. Instead, I found something I couldn't explain, something that made me question everything I thought I knew about the wilderness and about myself. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I could leave it behind. But the story doesn't end there. That was just the beginning. The air was heavy that evening, colder than it should have been for that time of year. It wasn't just the temperature, it was the weight of the silence around me. The kind of silence that makes you question if the world is holding its breath, waiting for something you're not ready for. My breath, visible in sharp puffs against the twilight, was the only thing that reminded me I was still part of this world. I'd been tracking the creature for 2 days. At first, I convinced myself it was a bear, maybe a big one. The footprints were large, yes, but a hunter's mind can rationalize just about anything when it wants to. But the tracks, they didn't move like a bear's. Too deliberate, too human. The deeper I went into the woods, the stranger things became. The trees, old, sturdy spruce, looked as though they'd been twisted by giant hands. Branches snapped clean off at heights no animal could reach. I found carcasses too. Not fresh kills, but animals left untouched by scavengers. Deer, rabbits, hell, even a fox, just lying there, their lifeless eyes staring into nothing. That night, I set up camp near a frozen stream. The wind had picked up, howling through the trees like a ghost looking for something it had lost. I built my fire high, not for warmth, but for comfort. There's something about fire. It feels like it can protect you, even when you know it's useless against whatever's out there. I was sharpening my knife, trying to drown out the sound of the wind, when I heard it. A howl. But not a wolf's howl, no. This was deeper. It resonated in my chest, like the sound itself was alive. It was distant at first, but then it came again, closer this time. My hand froze mid, sharpened, the knife hovering over the wet stone. Could be the wind, I muttered to myself, though I didn't believe it. The howls grew louder as the night went on, accompanied by something worse, a heavy, deliberate breathing. Not mine, and not from the fire. It was circling my camp. Whatever it was, it stayed just beyond the glow of the flames, as if it knew where the shadows ended and I began. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time the breathing stopped, I thought it was gone. But then I'd hear a branch snap, or the crunch of snow underfoot. It wasn't just watching me, it was testing me. By dawn, I decided to follow the tracks again, hoping daylight would make me feel braver. The trail was easy to find, massive footprints leading deeper into the forest. But the farther I went, the more I realized it wasn't afraid of me. It wanted me to follow. Around midday, I came across something that stopped me cold. A tree, stripped of its bark, with deep claw marks gouged into its surface. It wasn't random, it was deliberate. A warning. My heart started pounding in a way it hadn't since my first hunt, decades ago. I tightened my grip on my rifle. Hours passed, and the tracks became erratic, zigzagging like the creature was playing a game. Then I saw it, just for a second. A shadow, impossibly tall, moving between the trees. My instincts screamed at me to run, but the hunter in me pushed forward. "Show yourself," I shouted into the forest, my voice cracking, and it did. 50 yards ahead, standing between two massive spruces, it emerged. Tall, too tall. Its frame was massive, its shoulders impossibly wide. It was covered in thick, matted hair, and its eyes, God, its eyes. They weren't animal eyes. They were intelligent, piercing. They looked through me, as if peeling back every layer of who I thought I was. I raised my rifle, but my hands were shaking. My finger hovered over the trigger, but something in its gaze stopped me. It didn't move. It didn't roar or charge. It just stood there, watching. Then it tilted its head as if curious, and let out a low, guttural growl. It wasn't a sound of anger or fear. It was deliberate. A message. I froze, unsure whether to pull the trigger or run. And that's when I realized I wasn't the hunter here. I was prey. The moment I took a step back, it disappeared into the trees, as silent as it had come. The forest seemed to exhale, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. But I knew it wasn't over. It was still out there waiting, watching. I turned back toward camp, my rifle still clutched tightly in my hands. The sun was sinking again, and with it, my last shred of confidence. Whatever I was chasing, it wasn't an animal, and it wasn't afraid of me. As the shadows grew longer, I knew one thing for sure. I'd never been more terrified in my entire life. The forest had gone silent, not the natural quiet I'd come to know over decades of hunting. The hush of a still night, where the wind rustles the leaves, and distant owls call out. This was something else, a suffocating, unnatural silence, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I tightened my grip on my rifle, my gloves creaking against the wood. My breath came out in even bursts, visible in the icy air. I told myself to stay calm, to focus, but deep down I knew. This was no bear, no moose, nothing I could explain away with logic or experience. It was there. I didn't see it at first, not directly, but I felt it, something massive, watching me from the shadows of the towering pines. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and my body reacted instinctively, like prey sensing a predator. Then I saw the eyes. 2 amber orbs, glowing faintly, reflecting the moonlight in a way no animal's eyes should. They were too high off the ground, too far apart. They didn't blink. I froze, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it could hear me. "Who's there?" I called, my voice shaky and weak. It wasn't a demand, it was a plea. The eyes moved, slowly, deliberately. They swayed as if studying me, weighing me. Then it stepped forward, just enough for the moonlight to catch its outline. It was enormous, 7 feet tall, maybe more. Its body was covered in thick, matted fur, black as the night, but its face was something else. Human, but wrong. The nose was flat, the jaw too wide. The mouth set in an expression that wasn't quite anger, but wasn't far from it. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, the rasp of my breath in the frozen air. My mind raced, flipping through every possibility, every rational explanation, but nothing fit. Then, it made a sound. Low and guttural, it started deep in its chest and rumbled outward, like the growl of a distant storm. It wasn't just a noise, it was a feeling. It vibrated through my ribcage, settled in my gut, and sent a jolt of raw, primal fear coursing through me. I should have run. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn and bolt, but I couldn't. My legs were cemented to the ground, my hands uselessly gripping the rifle. The growl grew louder, and the creature took another step toward me. Its massive foot crunched through the snow, leaving an imprint so large it looked like it belongs to some ancient beast. That was when it hit Medra. It wasn't here to kill me, it was warning me. The growl shifted into something almost like a roar, deep, resonant, and so loud it echoed off the trees. I felt it in my bones, and finally the paralysis broke. My legs moved before I had time to think. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush like a frightened deer. Branches whipped at my face, and the snow made every step a struggle. Behind me, I could hear it following. Not close, but close enough. Heavy footsteps thundered through the forest, snapping branches and shaking the ground. It was chasing me, driving me out, hurting me away from something I wasn't meant to see. The camp. I just needed to get back to the camp. I don't know how long I ran, but it felt like an eternity. My lungs burned, my legs ached, and my vision blurred from the effort. The footsteps behind me never faltered, never slowed, always keeping the same impossible pace. When I finally broke through the trees and saw my tent in the clearing, I nearly collapsed with relief. But I didn't stop. I dove inside, grabbed my pack, and fumbled for the lighter in my pocket. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to spark the flame, but when I did, I held it high, hoping the fire would keep it at bay. For a moment, there was nothing. No footsteps, no growls, just silence. Then I saw it, standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the firelight, its glowing eyes fixed on me. It didn't move, didn't growl. It just watched. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the fire, my rifle across my lap, staring into the darkness where it had been. But it never came closer. By morning, it was gone. When I packed up and made my way back to town, I didn't tell anyone the full story. My hunting partner laughed when I mentioned something big, out there, chalking it up to exhaustion or an overactive imagination. But I knew. Some things aren't meant to be hunted. Some places aren't meant to be disturbed. And some creatures, they're better left alone. I haven't gone back to the Chugach Mountains since. I haven't hunted since. And I never will again.